November 12, 1966. Central Highlands, South Vietnam. The jungle was breathing that morning. Thick, wet air pressing against every man's chest as the 1st Cavalry Division moved through the elephant grass. The rain had stopped, but the mist lingered, clinging to the blackened barrels and sweat-stained sleeves of their fatigues. Specialist William "Billy" Harris adjusted his helmet strap and glanced down at the strange weapon in his hands. Matte black, sleek, almost toy-like. "Plastic rifle," he muttered. That's what the grunts had started calling it. The M16. Light as a feather, shorter than the M14s their fathers had carried in Korea, and made of materials that didn't look like they belonged in a war zone. Ahead, Sergeant Mike Evers raised a fist. The platoon froze. The forest went dead silent. No birds, no bugs, just the slow drip of water from the canopy above. Somewhere out there, the Viet Cong were watching. Evers whispered into the radio, "Echo 2-1, halt. We've got movement." A whisper of leaves. A faint click of metal. Then, hell broke loose. The tree line ahead erupted in muzzle flashes. The sound of AK-47 fire cracked like snapping bamboo. The platoon dove for cover as rounds chewed into the wet soil. Harris hit the ground, rolled, and brought his M16 up. He squeezed the trigger. Pop, 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 pop. 5 rounds burst out in a heartbeat. Fast, crisp, no recoil. The smell of burnt powder filled the air as brass casings bounced off the roots beside him. The lightweight rifle danced in his grip, controllable, smooth. For a moment, Harris almost smiled. Then, click. The bolt jammed. Harris cursed under his breath. He yanked the charging handle. Nothing. He smacked the side. Still nothing. The weapon had jammed in the middle of a firefight. Around him, men screamed orders, firing their rifles, M60s roaring into the jungle. The air stank of gunpowder and blood. Evers crawled beside him. "What's wrong?" "Jam. She's jammed," Harris shouted. "God damn it," Evers hissed, slamming his own M16 against a tree to clear the casing. "They said this thing was self-cleaning." Another burst of enemy fire whizzed past. Dirt exploded near Harris's face. He grabbed the jammed round, forced it free with a knife, and chambered another. This time, it fired. But the damage was done. After 15 minutes of brutal fighting, the platoon pulled back. 6 men were wounded. 1 was dead. As the medics worked and the jungle went quiet again, Harris sat on a log, breathing hard, rain dripping off his helmet. He looked at the black rifle in his lap. The plastic rifle. He didn't feel lucky to have it. He felt betrayed by it. Back at camp that night, talk around the fire was bitter. "Should have never switched from the M14, one man spat. "Wood and steel. That's a real rifle." "Yeah," another added. "This thing's for parades, not the goddamn jungle." They didn't know it yet, but their words were echoing across every U.S. base in Vietnam. Reports of failures. Dirty barrels. Jammed chambers. Soldiers dying because their weapon failed them when it mattered most. And somewhere in Hanoi, a North Vietnamese officer laughed as he studied photos of captured M16s. "The Americans," he said, "send their men to war with toys." The M16 had entered the war with a promise. Lighter, faster, more accurate. But in the mud and humidity of Vietnam, it was a liability. The early rifles lacked chrome-lined chambers, and their ammunition burned dirty. No cleaning kits. No manuals. No mercy. In those early months, the Viet Cong mocked it openly, calling it the toy gun, the Mattel rifle, the American plastic. They joked that the GIS new rifle jammed faster than it could fire. But that laughter wouldn't last. Because somewhere back in the States, engineers, soldiers, and generals were working day and night to fix what was broken, and when the M16 returned to the field, it wouldn't just silence the jokes. It would change jungle warfare forever. If you're enjoying this deep dive into Vietnam's forgotten battles, take a second to hit that like button. It really helps us bring you more stories from the front lines. Arlington, Virginia, 1957. In a small, nondescript office inside the Armalite Corporation, a young firearms designer named Eugene Stoner leaned over a steel workbench. His hands were steady, his eyes focused. Before him lay the prototype that would one day become the most famous and infamous rifle of the Vietnam War. The AR-15. It was nothing like the heavy M1 Garand or the battle-proven M14. This was lean, angular, and alien, made of aircraft-grade aluminum and reinforced plastic. At a glance, it looked more like something out of science fiction than a soldier's weapon. Stoner wasn't chasing looks, though. He was chasing efficiency. After the Korean War, studies showed that most firefights happened under 300 yards. The Army's beloved .30-06 and 7.62 mm rounds were overkill. Powerful, yes, but too heavy, too punishing, and limiting in ammo capacity. Stoner's idea was simple but revolutionary. Give every soldier a lightweight rifle that could fire small, high-velocity rounds quickly and accurately. The result was a weapon that could fire the new .223 Remington round. Light, fast, deadly. Soldiers could carry twice as much ammo, and the recoil was almost non-existent. In Stoner's tests, the rifle performed beautifully. But when he brought it to the U.S. Army Ordnance Board, they weren't impressed. "It looks like a toy," one general said, sneering at the black polymer stock. "You expect a soldier to trust his life to plastic?" Another added, "Our men need stopping power, not gadgets." They sent Stoner away. But fate had other plans. In 1959, Armalite sold the rights to Colt's manufacturing company, who saw potential where the Army didn't. Colt rebranded the rifle as the M16 and began an aggressive campaign, not just for the Army, but for the Pentagon itself. And in 1962, as U.S. involvement in Vietnam deepened, General Curtis LeMay, head of the U.S. Air Force, ordered thousands of AR-15s for his security forces. He called it the best rifle we've ever tested. The Pentagon took notice. Soon after, Secretary of Defense Robert McNamara, the man who loved data more than dogma, looked at the numbers. The M14 weighed nearly 10 pounds loaded and was difficult to control on full auto. The M16 weighed 6. Soldiers could carry more ammunition, shoot faster, and move lighter through the jungle. In 1964, McNamara made it official. The M16 would become the standard rifle for U.S. forces in Vietnam. The decision came fast. Too fast. The Army rushed the rifle into production without fully understanding its quirks, or the environment it would face. No one told the troops that the rifle needed special cleaning. No one gave them the right powder in the ammunition. They were told it was self-cleaning. And by 1965, that lie was marching into the steaming jungles of Southeast Asia. Pleiku Province, 1965. Private First Class Tommy Laird sat in the mud, wiping grime from his rifle's chamber with the edge of a T-shirt. Around him, the sound of distant artillery thudded in the air. The weapon was supposed to be perfect. Lightweight, accurate, foolproof, the pamphlet had said. But his first firefight changed everything. After 20 rounds, the rifle jammed tight. When he finally cleared it, he saw the culprit, burnt powder residue caked inside the chamber like tar. The gun was choking on its own fire. He stared at the black barrel and muttered under his breath, "They said this thing cleans itself. They lied." Across Vietnam, that same scene was playing out again and again. In the Central Highlands, in the Mekong Delta, near the Cambodian border. Thousands of new M16s were failing in combat. Letters flooded home from angry soldiers. Congressional hearings loomed. The rifle that was meant to revolutionize modern warfare was turning into a death sentence. But even as U.S. troops cursed the rifle, something strange happened. The Viet Cong began to fear it. Because when it did work, when it was clean and properly fed, it was terrifying. Its rounds moved faster than sound, fragmenting on impact. They didn't just punch through flesh, they shredded it. A single hit could tear a man apart. Stories spread through enemy ranks of men hit in the arm whose limbs vanished. Of a single shot turning a torso into ruin. It was small. It was light. And it was devastating. And once the army fixed the flaws, once the M16 returned in its perfected form, the laughter from the jungle would die out completely. If you're fascinated by how a weapon once mocked as a failure became one of history's deadliest rifles, make sure to subscribe. More untold Vietnam stories are coming your way every week. March 18, 1967, Mekong Delta, South Vietnam. The river was quiet that morning, the kind of eerie silence that meant trouble was close. Boats from the 9th Infantry Division's Riverine Force drifted along the muddy water, propellers whispering beneath the mist. Jungle on both sides, dense, dark, alive. Every soldier aboard clutched an M16, black metal gleaming in the damp light. Private First Class Tommy Laird, the same man who had once cursed his plastic rifle, sat near the bow, staring into the green wall of foliage. He'd cleaned the weapon 3 times that morning already, each motion automatic now. Pull the bolt. Wipe. Oil. Chamber check. Click. He wasn't taking any chances. The lieutenant's voice came over the radio. Charlie Company, eyes open. Intel says VC are operating along this stretch. We hit any resistance. Go hard and fast. The river narrowed. The boat slowed. The air grew thicker. Then, movement. From the right bank came a flash of orange light and the unmistakable crack of AK-47s. Bullets sliced through the air, kicking up sprays of water. The lead boat erupted in chaos as men ducked for cover. Ambush. Right side. Suppress. The lieutenant bellowed. Laird brought his M16 up and fired in controlled bursts. The recoil was barely there, just a gentle push, almost nothing compared to the M14 he'd trained with back in the States. His rounds cut through the foliage, sharp, fast, precise. The weapon sang in his hands. Pop, 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 smooth and deadly. It didn't jam. Not this time. The VC fighters had made a fatal mistake. They'd assumed the M16s were still unreliable, that the Americans' weapons would choke in the mud. They'd attacked confident, bold. But now, their laughter turned to screams. One of the sergeants, a broad Texan named Alvarez, fired a full magazine, shouting over the roar of gunfire. Tell your friends the toy guns bite back. A burst of return fire clipped the railing beside him. Splinters flew. Laird dropped low, reloaded, and returned fire. The M16's lightweight frame made it easy to maneuver, even in the rocking boat. The sharp 5.56 mm rounds tore through palm trunks and thin cover, forcing the Viet Cong to retreat deeper into the mangroves. In less than 10 minutes, the ambush was over. The platoon regrouped on the riverbank. Bodies lay sprawled among the roots and reeds, a dozen enemy fighters, rifles still clutched in their hands. Most had been hit multiple times, the small, high-velocity rounds tearing through tissue and bone in horrifying fashion. Laird stared at one body. The man's AK lay across his chest, his eyes open to the canopy above. For a moment, the young American felt something strange. Not triumph, not relief, but awe. He whispered, "Jesus, what the hell does this thing do to people?" The medic, hearing him, replied grimly, "It's the round. It tumbles when it hits. Doesn't just go through, it tears everything apart." The men fell silent. The rifle that had once jammed and failed, the toy mocked by both sides, was now showing its true nature, a precision weapon of astonishing lethality. Later that night, back at the base at Dong Tam, Laird cleaned his rifle again, the oil reflecting the glow of the lamps. Around him, men traded stories. "Man, that thing tore him up," Alvarez said, shaking his head. "Never seen anything like it." "Yeah," another added. "I heard that Song are calling it the Black Rifle of Death now." Rumors spread quickly in Vietnam, through word of mouth, intercepted radio chatter, even captured documents. The Viet Cong had come to fear the M16's high-velocity round. They called it the weapon that doesn't miss. Superstitions took root. Some said its bullets exploded inside the body. Others swore it was coated with poison. None of it was true, but all of it made the rifle even more terrifying. And yet, in Washington, the storm over the M16 was just beginning. Congress wanted answers. Parents back home were receiving letters from their sons, describing jams, misfires, and deaths caused by failed weapons. Photographs from the front lines showed cleaning rods jammed into rifle barrels, desperate attempts to clear carbon buildup mid-battle. The press picked it up. "The rifle that killed and failed," one headline read. It was chaos, both in the jungle and in the halls of power. To the men in the field, though, politics didn't matter. What mattered was whether the rifle fired when they needed it most. And with each engagement, as improved ammunition and cleaning kits arrived, the M16 began to earn something it had lost early on: trust. Laird wiped down the receiver, smiled faintly, and said to no one in particular, "Maybe this thing ain't so bad after all. If you've made it this far, soldier, don't forget to hit that like button. It tells us you want more stories straight from the heart of the Vietnam War." March 26, 1967. Near Siu Chi, South Vietnam. The jungle was screaming again. It wasn't the cry of birds or monkeys. It was the metallic scream of men and machine, the roar of M60s and the popping thunder of AK-47s echoing through a valley already thick with smoke. Alpha Company was pinned down, and their M16s, the sleek, shiny promise of a new era, were choking in the mud. Private First Class Tommy Laird, the same kid who had once cleaned his rifle with a T-shirt, was now lying face-first in the dirt, watching his squadmates fall one by one. "They're all jammed," someone yelled. "Goddamn rifle won't fire." Laird looked down at his own. The bolt was stuck halfway open, a spent casing wedged deep in the chamber. He tried the immediate action drill he'd been shown: pull, tap, rack, fire, but the thing didn't budge. His palms were slick with sweat and blood. The jungle heat was unbearable. His weapon useless. "Throw it and pick up an AK," shouted his sergeant. And Laird did, crawling over the body of a fallen Viet Cong fighter, grabbing the enemy's rifle, and pulling the trigger. Rat-a-tat-tat. It fired without hesitation. He didn't know it then, but scenes like this were playing out across the entire country. Soldiers throwing away their issued rifles and fighting with captured AK-47s, because the enemy's old weapon worked, and theirs didn't. At Tan Son Nhut Air Base, crates of malfunctioning rifles piled up, each one a symbol of the Army's humiliation. Letters from soldiers flooded the Pentagon and home newspapers. Some of them were read aloud in Congress. "Our men are dying because of this rifle." Their last words are, "My rifle jammed." The official story blamed poor maintenance. The truth was worse. The Army had changed the gunpowder in the 5.56 mm ammunition, switching from the clean-burning IMR powder stoner had designed for, to ball powder, a cheaper option with a dirtier burn. The result was catastrophic. It left heavy carbon fouling that glued spent casings into the chamber. And the rifles? They had no chrome lining, meaning humidity and corrosion ate away at the barrels. Troops were told it was self-cleaning. Cleaning kits weren't issued until months later. The soldiers had been sent to war with weapons that couldn't survive the war. April 1967, DAC 2. The 173rd Airborne Brigade was ambushed in the dark. The fight lasted hours. When the smoke cleared, dozens were dead, and when investigators arrived the next morning, they found rifles still jammed with brass, fingers locked around triggers. Many soldiers had fallen with their rifles half dismantled. They'd been trying to fix them mid-fight. It was a sight no general could ignore. A congressional inquiry followed. Senators demanded answers. And for the first time, military brass had to admit the M16 in its current form was a disaster. Meanwhile, back in America, in a dimly lit office at Colt's headquarters, engineers pored over blueprints and field reports. They replaced the faulty buffer springs. They chrome-lined the chambers. They redesigned the cleaning kits, rewrote the manuals, and issued proper ammunition. By 1968, the new M16A1 was born. This wasn't the fragile toy that had failed in the jungle. This was a weapon ready to fight back. When the first batches arrived in country, the difference was immediate. Soldiers noticed it the moment they chambered around. The bolt snapped forward cleanly, the action smooth and reliable. The chrome shimmered faintly when sunlight caught the barrel. Laird, now a battle-hardened corporal, ran his hand down the new weapon. "Looks the same," he muttered. His sergeant grinned. "Wait till it fires." And it did. Through mud, through rain, through weeks of patrol, it fired. The rifle that once betrayed its soldiers was finally earning back their trust. But by then, the damage to its reputation had already been done. The legend of the plastic rifle would take years to erase, even as its performance turned the tide of countless firefights. April 1967, Camp Radcliffe, and Key, South Vietnam. The rain had turned the base into a swamp. Red mud sucked at boots, water pooled in trenches, and the air hung thick with the smell of oil and metal. Inside a canvas tent marked ordnance, a group of engineers, armorers, and combat-worn soldiers huddled around a table scattered with rifles, cleaning rods, and ammunition boxes. At the head stood Colonel Harold Yount, a logistics officer sent from Washington. He looked exhausted, but his voice was sharp. "Gentlemen," he said, "the M16's not going anywhere. Our job is to make sure it starts working like it's supposed to." Across from him, a sergeant named Earl Doc Caffrey, fresh from the Central Highlands, slammed a filthy rifle onto the table. "With respect, sir, this thing's been getting my men killed. You can't fight in the jungle if your weapon chokes on mud." Yount nodded slowly. He'd heard it before, from every platoon in country. "You're right," he said. "And that's why you're here. We're going to fix this. Starting now." They tore the rifles apart, piece by piece. They cleaned, examined, measured, and soon, the truth became impossible to ignore. The problem wasn't just the gun, it was the ammunition. The powder used in the 5.56 mm cartridges had been changed without informing the designers. The Army had substituted a cheaper, dirtier burning propellant that left heavy carbon residue inside the chamber. Combine that with the lack of chrome lining, a feature used in nearly every other U.S. weapon, and the humid Vietnamese air did the rest. Corrosion, fouling, jams. The men had been sent to war with a rifle that wasn't built for the conditions it faced. Yount took notes furiously. "We'll need chrome-plated chambers, proper cleaning kits, training manuals, and the right damn powder." Washington listened. By the end of 1967, the M16A1 was born. It looked almost identical, but inside it was a different weapon. Chrome-lined bore and chamber, a closed bolt design, a forward assist to clear jams, and new, cleaner ammunition. Alongside every rifle came a cleaning kit and a simple manual titled Rifle, caliber 5.56 mm, M16A1, care and maintenance. The fixes were simple, but they changed everything. June 1968, Iron Triangle, north of Saigon. The 1st Infantry Division moved through the jungle like ghosts, their rifles wrapped in black tape to reduce shine. Lieutenant Ben Rogers led the column, his M16A1 cradled in his arms. Every man in his platoon had one, and they trusted them now. When the first shot came from the tree lean, Rogers didn't flinch. "Contact front. Lay it down," he barked. The platoon erupted in gunfire, M16A1s snapping in synchronized bursts. Rogers watched as the rounds cut through dense undergrowth like invisible blades. The enemy never stood a chance. Their AK fire came in wild, scattered arcs, while the Americans' lightweight rifles kept the line tight and accurate. Within minutes, the ambush had flipped. The Viet Cong were in retreat, leaving behind weapons, blood, and broken branches. After the firefight, Rogers walked the perimeter. His men were reloading calmly, wiping barrels, checking gear. No jams. No misfires. The rifle had earned its redemption. "Hell of a piece of work," his sergeant said, tapping the barrel. Rogers nodded. About time it lived up to the hype. The M16's evolution came at a terrible cost. Hundreds of American soldiers had died in firefights where their weapons had failed them. But those deaths forced change. The improved design turned the M16A1 into one of the most reliable and deadly rifles of the war. Reports from the field started to flip the narrative. Enemy forces fear the accuracy and rate of fire, one after-action report read. "The M16 has restored confidence among troops," another said. The black rifle, once a symbol of frustration and betrayal, was now a weapon of precision and psychological dominance. Across the battlefields of Vietnam, the balance of firepower shifted. The Viet Cong could still vanish into tunnels and shadows, but when the Americans brought their plastic rifles to bear, the jungle itself seemed to recoil. The mockery had turned into superstition. Back in Washington, congressional hearings concluded that the early failures were due to rushed procurement and poor logistical planning, not the rifle's design. Eugene Stoner, now watching from the sidelines, saw vindication at last. His creation, once dismissed as a toy, had become a legend. And for the men who carried it, it wasn't just a weapon anymore. It was a lifeline. If this story of innovation born from blood keeps you hooked, hit that subscribe button and join us for more hidden tales from the Vietnam War. Your support keeps these stories alive. January 1969. The A Shau Valley, South Vietnam. The valley was a bowl of green shadows, steep ridges, thick jungle, and the ever-present smell of wet decay. It was enemy territory through and through, one of the last strongholds of the North Vietnamese Army. The 101st Airborne Division had been ordered to take it, and every man knew what that meant. They called it Hell's Anvil. The morning of the assault began with the thunder of rotor blades. Dozens of UH-1 Hueys swarmed low over the treetops, wind flattening the elephant grass. Below, the jungle flashed with muzzle fire as tracer rounds clawed up toward the sky. Inside one of those choppers sat Sergeant Mike Evers, the same hardened squad leader who'd cursed his M16 3 years earlier at IA Drang. But now, his rifle was no longer a liability. It was an extension of himself. The new M16A1 rested across his knees, gleaming under the red interior light. He could feel its balance, its readiness, its history. The pilot's voice crackled through the headset. "LZ ahead. 2 minutes. Hold tight." Evers looked to his men. "You know the drill. Fast, loud, and mean." The Huey dipped, skimming over treetops before flaring for landing. Dirt and leaves exploded around them. Evers jumped first, boots sinking into the mud, rifle up and scanning. The instant they hit the ground, the jungle erupted. Gunfire from the ridges, RPGs shrieking overhead. "Move! Move! Push through!" he shouted, sprinting for cover behind a fallen log. He sighted an NVA position through the trees, a flash of movement, and fired a 3-round burst. The rifle responded instantly. Clean, precise, deadly. The man dropped. 4 hours. The firefight raged across the valley. Evers's platoon fought uphill, clearing bunkers and tree lines, their M16A1s chattering like a storm. When the enemy counterattacked, the Americans unleashed sheets of lead in reply. Accurate, disciplined, relentless. The lighter ammunition meant they could carry twice the firepower of the M14. Every man had hundreds of rounds ready. Every burst counted. By nightfall, the A Shao Valley burned. The NVA retreated under cover of darkness, leaving their dead behind. The Americans had taken the ridge, at a cost, but they'd proven something vital. The M16 had finally come of age. That same month, military reports described a shift in tactics. Jungle warfare, once defined by ambush and close-quarter chaos, was evolving into something new. Small fire teams armed with M16s could deliver massive, precise firepower without the weight of older rifles. It wasn't just a tool anymore, it was a force multiplier. In engagements where AK-47s once ruled, the M16 now dominated. The 5.56 mm round speed, nearly 3,200 feet per second, and its tendency to tumble after impact created devastating wounds, far beyond its size. Enemy medics were baffled. Soldiers feared it. Captured NVA diaries spoke of it. The black rifle, the small one, it makes holes that do not close. We call it the whisper that tears. Fear had become a weapon. March 1969. Firebase ripcord. Evers sat cleaning his rifle beside a burning drum, the orange light flickering across his face. Around him, the men joked, smoked, and swapped stories. Private Harris, younger but now a seasoned fighter, looked over. "You remember when we first got these things?" he asked. Evers chuckled. "Yeah. Thought they were junk. And now?" Evers snapped the rifle together and chambered a round. The metallic click was clean, crisp. "Now," he said quietly, "it's the reason we're still breathing." The men nodded. The sound of artillery echoed in the distance, a reminder that the war was far from over. But the weapon they'd once mocked had saved their lives more times than they could count. It had turned the tide in firefights where seconds meant survival. It had rewritten the rules of engagement in the jungles of Southeast Asia. The M16 wasn't just a rifle anymore, it was the backbone of a new kind of warfare. And as its reputation spread, it became the standard not just in Vietnam, but across the entire U.S. military, from the Mekong to the DMZ. By the end of the decade, it would define an era. If you're deep into this story of how the M16 reshaped combat in Vietnam, don't forget, hit that like button, drop a comment telling us where you're watching from, and subscribe for more forgotten war stories that shaped history. August 1969. The Parrot's Beak, near the Cambodian border. The jungle was alive again with whispers, this time not from American patrols, but from the Viet Cong. Word had spread fast across the hidden camps and bamboo shelters along the Ho Chi Minh Trail. Beware the new American rifle. The black one. The one that screams. A young VC squad leader named Tran Duc Huy crouched in the darkness, his AK slung low. He'd fought the Americans for 3 years now. He'd seen their helicopters, their napalm, their M60s. But lately, something had changed. The Americans were hitting harder, faster, cleaner. Huy's men used to laugh when they saw the slim black rifles of the enemy. Toys, they'd call them. But now, they whispered about them like curses. Stories of entire units wiped out before they could fire back. One survivor claimed the bullets tore men apart like the claws of a tiger. Huey didn't believe in ghosts, but he did believe in death, and he could feel it coming. Across the border, deep in the jungle, Captain Ben Rogers and his platoon were moving silent under the canopy, their boots sinking into the soft loam. The air was thick with mosquitoes and tension. "Remember," Rogers whispered, "they'll try to draw us in close. Stay spread out. Short bursts only." His men nodded, gripping their M16A1s tightly. The rifles were no longer strangers to them. They were trusted partners. They moved in single file, every sense alive. Then, a rustle to the left. Rogers froze. Before he could speak, gunfire erupted. The world exploded into chaos. AK-47s barked from the trees, tracers slicing through the darkness. The first rounds hit the point man. He went down instantly. "Contact. Left flank." Rogers shouted. The jungle lit up. The Americans hit back, hard. The M16s unleashed a fury of controlled, synchronized bursts. Each rifle fired with deadly precision, each round carving through the humid air. The sound was distinct, pop pop pop, faster and sharper than the heavier AKs. Within minutes, the balance of fire changed. Rogers's platoon fanned out, using suppressive fire to pin the enemy. The Viet Cong tried to reposition, but the M16's flat trajectory and light recoil meant the Americans could shoot faster, move faster, think faster. A single squad's volume of fire now rivaled that of an entire company from earlier wars. And when the VC finally broke cover, they were shredded by a storm of lead. After the fight, the jungle was silent again. Smoke drifted between the trees. The ground was littered with empty casings and the smell of cordite. Huey's body lay among the fallen, eyes open, rifle by his side. Captain Rogers exhaled slowly, lowering his weapon. He looked down at the sleek black rifle, its barrel still warm. "That's the difference," he said quietly. "Ounces instead of pounds. Precision instead of panic." He knelt beside one of the captured AKs. Heavy. Reliable. But crude. The AK had ruled the early years of the war. Now, the M16 was rewriting the script. By late 1969, word of the rifle's transformation had spread through every corner of the conflict. Viet Cong and NVA commanders issued new orders. Engage Americans only from a distance. Avoid firefights with units carrying the M16. In captured documents, U.S. analysts found chilling reports of psychological breakdowns among enemy soldiers after prolonged contact. The black rifle had become a symbol of unstoppable lethality, a weapon that fired faster than a heartbeat and killed faster than pain could register. The same toy gun that once jammed in the mud was now a nightmare whispered in the dark. And for American troops, that shift mattered. They'd lost friends to this weapon's early flaws. They'd cursed it, doubted it, and nearly abandoned it. But through blood, sweat, and countless dead patrols, they'd forged something terrifying, a rifle that changed how wars were fought. It didn't just win firefights. It owned them. That fall, when Rogers rotated home, he carried his M16A1 onto the transport plane himself, not because he was required to, but because he didn't trust anyone else with it. He ran his hand over the black receiver, the worn tape on the grip, the scratches along the barrel. "This thing started as a joke," he said quietly. "But it grew up fast." As the plane lifted off, he glanced out the window. Below, the endless green of Vietnam stretched toward the horizon, the jungle that had tested him, and the weapon that had saved him. May 1970, Quan Loy Airfield, South Vietnam. Dust and heat shimmered off the tarmac as helicopters came and went in constant rhythm. It was the heartbeat of a war that had no clear front line anymore, just endless operations, endless patrols. The men of the 1st Cavalry Division lounged near the flight line, rifles across their laps, sweat cutting rivers through the red dust on their faces. They looked different now, leaner, harder, quieter. Veterans forged by years of jungle combat. And beside every one of them lay an M16A1. Sergeant Mike Evers sat under a torn canopy, flipping through a maintenance manual, its pages worn and smudged. "Never thought I'd live to see the day I actually liked reading one of these," he said, grinning to himself. Private Harris laughed. "Yeah, sir, you and half the army. Remember when they told us these things were self-cleaning?" "Yeah," Evers replied, "and remember how many coffins that lie filled." He looked down at the rifle in his hands, the same one he'd carried through IA Drang, through the Mekong, through a dozen nameless valleys. He'd seen the worst of it, friends lost, missions botched, ambushes sprung. But he'd also seen the rifle evolve, from fragile prototype to battlefield predator. Now, in 1970, it wasn't just a weapon. It was doctrine. The doctrine of fire. The U.S. Army had always built its infantry tactics around firepower, but Vietnam rewrote the rules. Before, a soldier's rifle was heavy and deliberate. Now, with the M16's speed, lightness, and precision, small units could strike like thunder and vanish before the enemy even recovered. Squads learned to move in bursts, shoot, shift, shoot again, saturating targets with short, controlled fire. Accuracy by volume. Discipline by design. The weapon's very philosophy changed the American soldier. The old saying was that wars were won by logistics and artillery. In Vietnam, it became something else. Wars are won by the man whose rifle doesn't stop. In the enemy's words. Captured Viet Cong communications told the rest of the story. Reports intercepted by MACV in 1970 described the black rifle with almost religious fear. The Americans' new rifle fires faster than our AKs. It kills even when the shot seems small. Avoid close combat. Their black weapon cuts our ranks before we can close the distance. An NVA colonel, interviewed years later, put it simply. When we heard that sound, that short, sharp pop, we knew we were in trouble. The M16 had gone from being a liability to a weapon of terror, reshaping the psychology of the battlefield. Its lightweight frame let troops carry hundreds of rounds. Its muzzle velocity turned the smallest bullet into devastation. And in the hands of men who had learned to trust it, it made the difference between life and death. Homefront redemption. Back in the United States, the M16 story was playing out in headlines and hearings. Congressional committees that had once condemned it now called it a triumph of adaptation. Military training films replaced warnings with praise. The rifle became a symbol of America's technological ingenuity and of lessons learned the hard way. But not everyone forgot the early failures. In Arlington, Eugene Stoner stood on a shooting range watching a Marine sergeant fire an M16A1 at distant steel targets. Every shot hit with crisp precision. The weapon cycled flawlessly. No jams. No misfires. The Marine turned and gave a thumbs up. "Shoots like a dream, sir." Stoner smiled faintly. Took a few nightmares to get there. He never saw it as perfect, but he knew it had become unstoppable. From Vietnam to the world. By the early 1970s, the M16A1 was everywhere. On patrol boats, helicopter crews, recon teams, and frontline infantry. Its design inspired dozens of variants around the world. Israel, Canada, the Philippines, even NATO allies adopted versions of it. The rifle that began as an experiment became the blueprint for a generation. And when the U.S. finally withdrew from Vietnam in 1973, the black rifle came home with them, not as a symbol of failure, but as the embodiment of endurance. It would soon evolve again, into the M16A2, then the M4 carbine, the rifle carried into Afghanistan and Iraq decades later. But its soul, the lightweight, high-velocity, precision-driven design, was born in the steaming jungles of Vietnam, forged through mud, blood, and fire. That night, at Quan Loy, Sergeant Evers sat outside his tent, cleaning the same rifle one last time. He'd be shipping home in the morning. The jungle hummed around him, alive and restless. He ran a rag down the barrel, slow and careful, like a ritual. Harris walked over, holding 2 cups of instant coffee. "Hard to believe it's over," Harris said. Evers nodded. "For us, maybe. But this thing," he tapped the rifle's stock, "it's just getting started." They sat in silence, listening to the night. Somewhere out there, thunder rolled, distant, hollow, eternal. The war would end. But the echo of the M16's burst, that sharp, metallic heartbeat, would never fade. If you've followed this journey from mockery to mastery, take a second to like this video. It helps more than you know, and if you're watching from a military family, drop a salute in the comments. This one's for you. April 30th, 1975, Saigon. The city trembled under the roar of approaching artillery. Smoke rose over the skyline as helicopters swarmed the embassy rooftop, their rotors cutting through the humid morning air. The war was ending, not with a victory, but with an evacuation. On the ground, in the chaos of the final hours, Marines of the 2nd Battalion, 9th Regiment formed a defensive perimeter around the U.S. Embassy compound. They were tired, running on adrenaline and instinct. But their rifles, the M16A1S, were ready. One Marine, Corporal James Keenan, crouched behind a concrete planter, sweat running down his neck. He'd joined the Corps just 2 years earlier, never imagining he'd witness the fall of Saigon. He checked his rifle one last time, the same black, carbon-streaked machine that had been through countless skirmishes. He could feel its weight like an old friend's hand on his shoulder. From the streets beyond the embassy walls came the sounds of chaos, shouting, engines, gunfire in the distance. Keenan adjusted his grip, muttering, "From the jungle to the city. Guess you're sticking with us till the end, huh?" The rifle didn't answer, but the metallic click of its charging handle said everything. The same weapon that had been mocked, cursed, and doubted now stood as the last line of defense for American soldiers leaving Vietnam. The long shadow of the M16. When the last helicopters lifted off from Saigon, the M16 left with them, but its war was far from over. The rifle followed American soldiers into every conflict that came after: Grenada, Panama, the Persian Gulf, Somalia, Afghanistan, Iraq. Each new battlefield carried echoes of Vietnam, and each new generation of soldier inherited Stoner's design. The M16A2, born in the 1980s, refined the weapon further: heavier barrel, improved sights, and a 3-round burst. It became standard issue across NATO. Then came the M4 carbine, a shorter, modernized descendant that would see combat in Fallujah and Kandahar, a direct legacy of that plastic rifle from the 1960s. What began as an experiment in efficiency had become the most produced Western rifle in history. Over 8 million M16s and variants would roll off assembly lines worldwide. And yet, in every design, in every evolution, the same core remained: light, fast, accurate, and devastating. A weapon that turned mockery into mastery. The men who carried it. For the soldiers who'd first carried the rifle into the humid green hell of Vietnam, its story was personal. Sergeant Mike Evers retired in 1972, his service ribbons faded, his knees shot, his memory scarred by the jungle. But he kept his cleaning kit. Private William "Billy" Harris became a firearms instructor back home in Ohio. When new recruits asked him what made the M16 different, he'd grin and say, "It doesn't matter what it's made of. What matters is who's holding it." And for Captain Ben Rogers, now an old man, the rifle became a symbol of lessons paid for in blood. he often told his grandchildren. Every war teaches you something. Ours taught us that progress doesn't come easy, it comes with a body count. Fear and respect. In Vietnam, the enemy had feared the rifle's sound. In Iraq, insurgents learned to fear its precision. And around the world, the M16 became both an icon and a warning. A symbol of American firepower, yes, but also of the brutal ingenuity that war demands. Even decades later, veterans could still recall the smell of the rifle's gas, the warmth of its handguard after a firefight, the rhythmic pop-pop-pop that meant life or death. It wasn't perfect. No weapon ever is. But it endured. Because, like the soldiers who carried it, it adapted. The final reflection. At the Vietnam Veterans Memorial in Washington, D.C., the black granite walls stretch silently across the grass, reflecting the faces of those who come to remember. Sometimes, among the visitors, an old man will rest his hand against a name, close his eyes, and whisper something only he and the ghosts understand. For many of them, that whisper includes the rifle, the one that changed everything. The one they once cursed in the rain. The one that jammed in the mud. The one that, when fixed, brought them home alive. It was never just about metal or plastic. It was about trust. About survival. About evolution born in fire. As night falls over the memorial, the lights flicker across the etched names. Each one tells a story, of bravery, of loss, of adaptation. And somewhere, across the years and continents, the sound of an M16 burst still echoes, sharp, precise, unrelenting. The plastic rifle that once drew laughter became the most feared sound in the jungle. It didn't just change a war. It changed war itself. If you felt the weight of this story, the fear, the loss, the triumph, take a second to like this video and subscribe. Every click helps us keep these voices alive. And tell us in the comments where you're watching from. The world deserves to remember.